So Donna, if you could introduce yourself and then please answer the questions and then pass on to Rob, and then Rob, you could pass on to Helen. That would be great. And thank you for everyone joining, and really look forward to listening.
Thanks very much, Isaac. And I love your top. It's gorgeous, that, isn't it? It's absolutely lovely. So I'm Donna Hall. I was a chief exec at Wigan Council for about 10 years. I now chair Bolton NHS Foundation Trust, and also a charity called Possibilities, which is to support people with learning disabilities towards an equal life. I also chair a think tank called New Local, which is about getting communities involved in transforming local areas. So really difficult, challenging question. Do you want me to answer all of them, Isaac, all at once? Yeah, okay. So I think the challenges, we all know from our own experience, or most of us probably do, that it's just fractured, it's broken into little bits. And it's based on a very kind of social care, I think, is based on a very medicalised model rather than a social and a human model. And also we don't work together to support people and wrap support and help with around people. We just do our own little bit. So I know at the NHS Foundation Trust that I chair, a lot of our things that go wrong are to do with things that might have happened in primary care or might have happened in social care, and yet we don't work well together across the system. And we report to, so that the things that's the biggest challenge is I think we are very centralised as a country, and the NHS is amazing, but it's very command and control. It's not based on listening to the voices of people with lived experience like yourself and Anna and others who can help to redesign services. That's what the biggest challenge is. It's hierarchical, it's top down. It assumes it knows what's best for people without really listening to people. And I think we heard from Jane in a brilliant video, didn't we, earlier on today, that empathetic listening is the key to good support and to help people to live an equal life. So I think that's the biggest challenge. The problems and the gaps are, we think we know what's best for people as professionals without really asking them, and that's key to it all. Opportunities, I think there are so many. So when I was at Wigan, we did this thing called the Wigan Deal, which was about every citizen, all 323,000 of them, having an equal life, being listened to, being treated with respect. Whoever the public servant was or community person it was who was working with them, they would get that same level of dignity and respect. I know it sounds a daft thing to have to do with public servants, but we train them how to listen properly. And you'd think everyone knows how to listen. It's a very basic thing, but not everyone does listen. They put people into little boxes of need, and they kind of hide a bit behind the clipboard. So we didn't want that to happen. We wanted people to really connect human to human with public servants and people who drew on social care and people who had accessed any kind of service from the council, children's social care as well. So I think there are opportunities to think differently, but it takes a lot of courage and determination from people who manage public services on the ground in places, particularly social care. I do think there's some real innovation happening. We've got some people in this meeting who are leading some amazing change within their organisations and within their places. So there are some little spark plugs of great stuff happening. But I think the problem is that we've not got a clear plan for social care. And those 5 asks that Social Care Futures that yourself, Isaac, and Anna and others came up with are just exactly right, I think. And we just need to get, the opportunity is we need to get politicians at the national level and at the local level to listen to what you said, and to put more money in, I'll be honest as well. I think one of the issues is there's something that came out from the King's Fund this morning saying that we need an additional 7.9 billion a year to properly fund social care. It's always been seen as the Cinderella service to the NHS, and that's not right. It really isn't right. I mean, from my personal experience with my own mum and with my partner's mum and dad, going through horrific experience of just the navigating of the complexity of it. We've got to make it simple and easy to access. We've got to get staff to listen. We've got to get leaders to listen, and we've got to see social care as, you know, it's a part of life that we will all draw on social care at some point, you know, and that's, I think people are othered and put into categories. We find that with people with learning disabilities and autism in possibilities, they just get seen as, you know, let's send them to a day centre, get them out of the way kind of thing. So we've just built some new flats for people with learning disabilities, and the change in their life has been incredible. So one young man, Tom, who's 19, his only friend was his dad. He didn't have any friendship or any social connection with anyone. He's now got a group of friends of the people who've moved into the flats with him, and a girlfriend, you know, and his life is completely transformed. So sometimes it's not about services, it's about helping people with social connection, you know, like you said in your introduction. And your perfect day sounds exactly like mine: dogs, sofa, cuddles. I love it. So that's it from me, Isaac. Hope that's okay.
Thank you, Donna. And please, if anybody wants to add any reflections or comments in the chat box, do so. We'll pick them up later. Rob, over to you.
Thanks, Isaac. Thanks, everyone. Really great to be here. So I take very literally my brief to be a listener. So I was thinking about what did I hear this morning? And the first thing I was struck with was that home seems to have some practical dimensions. So there was the talk about safety, there was the talk about privacy, there was the phrase, you know, it's a place that's set up for me. So that's a pretty practical, physical thing about the space. But home is also very clearly about emotions and feelings. And there was a lot more talk about it's meals made with love. It's about love and dreams. It's about being happy. It's about fun. It's about connection. And I think one of the first challenges that we've got when we think about social care is the social care system, if we label it as a system, it tends to be a bit better with the practical stuff. It tends to be happy with that. I think you said, Isaac, about, you know, it's task focus, but it's not so comfortable with talking about emotions. It's not so comfortable talking about love. It's not so comfortable talking about life. And that is going to be our perennial challenge, because that first set of stuff is much more measurable. You know, is this stuff in place? Have we provided this? Is X there? Whether you feel happy or loved or warmth or safe is a very different emotion. And I think that things are quite difficult there. So I think there's a real challenge for us to think about those. I think the second challenge, and is to pick up Daphne's point from earlier, is that if we get it wrong, if we don't support people, then the very place that should be the most safe, the most warm, the most special, can feel the complete opposite of that. And that's a really horrible place to be, to feel like your home is a prison, as Daphne phrased it. To feel that your home is not somewhere that you feel all of those things means that you're in a place of real vulnerability, and it's not good. So this isn't a nice, soft, gentle conversation. This is fundamental about whether or not we get this, if we get this wrong. I think the third challenge, and I'm Chief Executive with Age UK Gloucestershire. So we're a charity that tries to promote better later life. And we've set our vision as being trying to make Gloucestershire the best county in which to grow older. And one of the things that we see all the time, which blows my mind, is that people encounter all the time the challenges as they get older, that their home needs to change and needs to adapt and isn't fit for purpose. And what blows my mind is we're somehow surprised that people's needs change. We know they do. We know that life will shift and change in lots of different ways. And yet we continue to have a society and a system that ignores the fact that aging happens. And so we build houses physically that aren't in a good place for people to age and change in. They are great if you're an archetypal young family with children and a few people living in that house, and it's all great. And the expectation is you'll move out of that at some point in the future into another and a bigger house, and at some point you'll have to move out of that into a bungalow probably, or a retirement community. But that's not the way people really want to live. There were some fascinating conversations in the chat about people that have lived in the same home for 80, 90 years. Actually, home, if, as Martin said in his video, if home is about stepping out the door and being able to walk to the cafe and people know you, then why should leaving the place that you know and you are supported be the expectation? And I think it's primarily the expectation, not because people want to move or do that, but because they feel they have to, that they feel that the physical place that they're growing older in doesn't work for them anymore and they've got to move. So I think there's definitely a requirement for homes, and the way that we set up homes and housing as a whole should think about the whole life course far more than it does. We should have an age-friendly standard in housing that says, not only is this going to be good for you when you're younger, but as your needs change, there is space for you to evolve and to adapt. I also think that one of the ways that people tend to adapt to their homes at the moment are some very practical things that you can put in. You can put grab rails in, you can change the layout of your home. That's great. But that tends to happen in a crisis at the moment. That tends to happen when it's really late and you're struggling. It tends to happen when you're not prepared for it. We've got to, as Donna was just saying, we've got to get much more upstream in terms of providing the information and advice to people to prepare and to adapt, not to have to react and to respond. We know these things are happening and they become much easier to accept and embrace and to learn if we move through it gradually, rather than saying, I'm absolutely at the end of my tether, I can't cope anymore. And the first thing you want me to do is learn new stuff or have a whole load of upheaval in my lives. We've got to be much more forward thinking and prepared. And there's been some discussion about technology. And I think technology can be really helpful here. And I think it will become more and more helpful. But social care, if we think about it being those emotional things and about relationships and life, is fundamentally a people thing. So the tech can be everything, but if you don't know how to use that tech, then it's not helpful. So we still are going to need people to help people understand their lives, their spaces, and the facilities and the resources that they may have available to support them. So overall, the challenge, I think, is embracing that lives are complicated and messy, embracing that a good life involves love and emotion and feeling, and working out how to adapt the practical things in a really positive, constructive way, rather than seeing it as something that can rush in at the end and happen to people. That's never going to make things feel better in my eyes.
Thank you, Rob. And we're now going to finally hand over to Helen. Helen, over to you.
Thank you. I think the biggest challenge is loneliness. And it's really interesting that the central image in the Mentimeter was love. But actually, most older people are older women living by themselves, who don't live in families. And I think that creates a particular context for us to be paying attention to. So my experience is I'm a carer for my mum, Daphne. I'm amazed we've got the same second name, but I'm an unpaid carer for my mum. And I've also set up a home care organisation because I wanted to see if I could be part of demonstrating a different way of working. So I've both seen it from being a registered manager of a home care organisation and an unpaid carer for my mum, who receives home care 3 times a day and needs quite a lot of support from her family too. So I think the biggest challenge is loneliness. I think this, and we know that this is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We know it has an amazingly significant effect on both health and well-being, and is just, frankly, miserable, really, really miserable. Not to have a purpose for getting up in the morning and not to think you're going to see anybody either. So for me, that's the biggest challenge, is people living by themselves and not seeing anybody. I think the second challenge is the same as Donna, is the fact that we are organised in silos. So when we're working in wellbeing teams, we were supporting a man called John, and we turn up in the morning to support John with his medication. And before we got there, we'd often overlap with the district nurse. And guess what? The district nurse was there to give John his medication as well, but she was giving him a different kind of medication. And I'm sure if we were tasked, or if Social Care Future was tasked with, how do we design supports that enable people to live well at home, we wouldn't design a separate reablement service funded differently to everything else. We wouldn't include social prescribing funded separately and accessed in a different way. We wouldn't have home care in the way that it's currently delivered, and that we wouldn't have separate district nursing. So here we've got some health services and some social care services that are all trying to do the same thing with the best will in the world, trying to enable people to live well at home and be part of their community. But the fact that we have to have people called system navigators, I think, is a great deal of shame for us. How have we designed a system that's so complex? We need to employ people to navigate the system for other people. So I think the opportunities are truly integrated health and social care, where there are neighbourhood teams whose role it is to support you to live well and be part of your community. And I think part of the challenge related to that is time and task commissioning of home care, which sets up all sorts of perverse incentives of carers, rushing out of one house to another as quickly as they can because they're not paid for travel time, or certainly that payment isn't passed on to them. And what I noticed with my mum is my mum's commissioned for 3 half-hour visits. And the visits last 20 minutes because they're trying to get as quickly as they can onto the next person. And they do the bare minimum, which is what's commissioned, of supporting mum with her medication and food. And mum got a phone call from a social prescriber saying, we're going to set you up with a befriender. And my mum is in a place in her later life where that's the last thing that she would tolerate. So because I see this from my mum, and I see this as working in home care, can we focus on relationships and love? Can we talk about love, as Rob says? Can we recruit people based on relationships and a relationship focus on well-being and not time and task? And that requires a fundamental shift to the way we use money in commissioning, and a fundamental shift in terms of how we work together. So my biggest challenge is loneliness.
Thank you to all of our session listeners. Martin.
Sorry, just bear with me a sec, Isaac. Yeah. Hi, thanks so much, everybody. As you probably picked up, that we've got some tech problems with the other stream. So I was just slightly distracted sending messages and trying to do something about that. People who've joined this session in frustration and not being able to get to the other one, we'll sort out the link problems at lunchtime. And so you can go in that one this afternoon if you want to. So thanks so much, Donna, Rob and Helen, for your first thoughts on what are the challenges we face in trying to close that gap between our aspirations for home and many people's experience, and the beginnings of a conversation about some of the opportunities to change that, which we'll get into more this afternoon. A few people have been making comments in the chat, but we're open now to have a little bit of conversation if people want to put their tuppence worth in before we go into a bit of a breakout opportunity for people to have closer conversations. So I think with the numbers we've got, you don't need to put your hand up or anything like that. Just unmute yourself and put your tuppence worth in. Who's going to be the brave first person?
Martin, could I ask something? Sorry, it's Wendy Burt.
Hi, Wendy. Yeah.
Hi. Really interestingly, I've got a really good friend who has recently moved into his own place, which is fantastic. But he's really, really struggling, as Helen was just talking about, with loneliness, really struggling. And it's almost making him think that maybe he needs to go back to a supported living setting. So, yeah, it's just kind of like an observation, really. And I think it's really important that we have to do something to help people to feel less lonely and isolated, because he's got the most beautiful flat in the most beautiful part of town. But actually, if you're lonely, it feels like crap, doesn't it? So.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll just go to one or two people who've got their hands up, and then we can get into a bit of conversation. So Pippa and then Jane. Hi,
thank you, Martin, and thanks everybody. It's been really great listening. I did try to join the other group because as a joint commissioner, I was thinking that one of our biggest challenges is getting the right quality of service in a place where people aren't living in their original home. But equally, we're tremendously challenged around being able to provide the right kind of support to people in their own homes, which I think is probably almost everybody's, if not everybody's, main aspiration. And I'm really conscious that on my day-to-day work at the moment, the biggest challenge that we face is actually being able to recruit almost anybody into a workforce that is willing and has the right disposition and the right qualities and values to come and do this most important work. So I'm listening to a conversation which is about what matters, and I feel as though my day-to-day work is almost entirely geared towards just one tiny element of what matters, and that's quite demoralizing to me. But it's also actually quite frightening, really, to be thinking that I want to commission and be part of a partnership that's commissioning the best possible support for people to live as independently and as you know, as much in control as it's possible to be around people's own lives. But actually, fundamentally, our work seems to distill it down to the basic essential of actually being able to recruit people. And I don't know how much difference it'll make with the government's sort of intentions around promoting social care as a career, but I don't think we've got that right. So we're also obviously working, well, not obviously, but we are working with community catalysts around micro enterprises. We're trying to think about how can we completely change the model so that they pop in and out, as we've been describing, with no time to have a good quality of life. But even then, trying to expand the model and trying to be creative is a really difficult task for us. And we're working in partnership. We're trying to collaborate. We're trying to co-produce those models. But change is so slow, isn't it? And I suppose I just wanted to try to take a strengths-based approach. Our values are right and our intentions are right and our resources, we would be able to pay for people to come in and do the right thing. But how do we make this world a world that other people who could have a job and a career in it want to come into? And I can see Helen's.
Thanks, Pippa. Yeah, so I'm going to bring
back.
Helen
Thank
in.
you.
I don't know whether you've seen, Pippa, but we've got a series of blogs that we're putting up based on Helen's experience of values-based recruitment. Do you want to just say a few words, Helen?
I absolutely think this is the answer to that. The biggest difference is recruiting from outside of health and care, and believing that if people have got the right heart and the right values, we can teach them the skills that they need. And that's still quite a radical concept, because what happens is people circulate around home care. The churn in home care is 65%. In wellbeing teams, it was 5%. So we have got some learning here that says we can do this differently. But I think it's two things. I think it's value-based recruitment, and I think it's stopping task and time commissioning. Because why would you spend 8 hours on shift and be paid for 6 of them? Because actually between 11 and 12, there's no work for you, so you just hang around. So I think it's two things. It's not necessarily all about more money. It's about the terms and conditions and not having task and time commissioning, and it's being brave enough to recruit from outside of social care.
And we've seen a few comments on the chat kind of backing up what you were saying there, Helen. I don't know if you've seen that series of blogs yet, Pippa, but I definitely recommend them if you haven't. You can just go to our website, and they're appearing one a week at the moment. There are 16 blogs altogether, Helen, so there's a lot of learning to share. I think, sorry, let's go to Jane and then Alec and Kate, and then we'll come back and have some conversation. Yeah.
Thanks, Martin. I missed the beginning, I'm afraid, because I was trying to get into other groups.
Yeah,
so
sorry
apologies
about
if
that.
I'm repeating anything that's already been said.
Yes, okay.
That's okay. I just wanted to pick up on what Wendy said, which really resonated with me about the loneliness and this difficulty between, living independently in your own home, which is most people's choice, but then the loneliness and isolation that can bring. My own situation is that I've got an adult daughter in her 20s with autism and mental health issues, who, after living in a residential home, is now in her own flat, but with a 24-hour package of support. She has someone with her in the flat all the time. They're people she doesn't choose to be with, people that often don't share her interests or what she wants to do in life. And at the moment in the county that we're in, there's a large consultation process on shaping the future of adult social services. And I supported her to complete the questionnaire. And the big thing that came out and really, really upset me was how isolated and how lonely she said she felt. And what she misses about the residential home, and believe me, there's not much she misses about the residential home because it was pretty appalling with many safeguarding issues. But what she does miss is the company that was there when she wanted it, the activities that were sometimes there that she could engage with. And I suppose my question is, how do we get that? How do we think creatively to get somewhere between this having your own home, which, as we say, most people quite rightly want, but also having that connection, you know, with others and having purpose in life? And that's something I've been working with our local authority on, supported living, for the last 4 years. Haven't yet managed to create the right offer, but I just wanted to know if anyone's got any ideas of how we link those two together.
Thanks, Jane, and we'll come back to that in a second. And I think it'd be good to have a bit of a conversation about commissioning. We've got a few commissioners in the room, and we've got some people with experience of commissioning, and the stuff that's been raised about connecting together different forms of support for people at home and how you do that practically speaking is an important one, I think. Let's go to Alec.
Hi, Alec Porter here from Bradford Council. I'm coming up to my 39th year in Bradford Council, and I started off in home care. I'm now a strategic manager, just like really focusing on what Helen was saying. It's the commodification of people and commodification of care. And I just think it's appalling. And actually, from a personal point of view, with a family relative recently, the care is done to, it's not done alongside and with. And I think there really needs to be a wholesale change in that. And I think it is the commissioning side of it that, for me, has made it much worse. And the other thing, I mean, partly on what Isaac was saying, the other thing is with this particular relative who lives in local authority housing, it feels like the amount of power she's lost as a tenant, in the way that the housing officer seems able to pop in any time to make judgments about lifestyles, etc. And I think there's something quite worrying about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Alec. So I'm going to go to Luke and then Kate.
I really like we're
He says he really likes how we're discussing this. A big problem for him is staffing.
Say a bit more, Luke, about the staffing.
Trying to get the right kind of people for the right person.
We need to bring in people normal or
we need to bring people in that have backgrounds in all sorts of industries.
And then
and then train them up and put them with somebody.
Right. Okay, thanks, Luke.
Or what, sorry? Or pop them with somebody that is trained to train them.
Yeah. Thanks, Luke. So I'll move on to Kate now. You want to unmute, Kate?
Am I off mute? I think, yeah.
Yes, you are,
hi,
yeah.
Kate Allison. I work at North Yorkshire County Council, and just a few points really. I think is really important about that upstream involvement. And at North Yorkshire County Council, we have a living well service, so we support people who are almost on the cusp of needing social care. So we have certain triggers for, our support being initiated. It is around changes in life, about bereavement, isolation. We're part funded by public health, so we can really focus on that, and it does work well. So we have those early conversations about getting your home suitable for ageing. We have close links with our front door team where we have OTs there, so we can get timely adaptations in. I think the challenge we've had on the last 18 months has been the whole focus, sadly, has been on hospital discharge processes because of COVID and that whole response. And I think the community aspect has sadly become neglected on the back of the need and desire to push for hospital discharges to ensure that the health system can respond to the COVID situation. And I think we have been neglected from that. We have a real challenge with sort of accessing staff in North Yorkshire. We have we have a big coastal community where we've got really big areas of social deprivation, really struggle with staffing. And there is a really big drive in terms of personalisation to push the direct payments so people can have that choice of control. But again, we're pulling from that same market where we do struggle. But again, the value-based recruitment, we changed our recruitment about 2 years ago for the Living Well team. And I think we were looking for the same kind of people from the same pot. Then we really changed our stance and we got some people that had the right values that answered the questions the way we wanted. And we were getting people from, we had physical instructors, we had a pastoral manager at a boarding school, and it really, really made us stop and think about changing the mould and getting people in with the right values. And as you say, the training can be provided. So I think, you know, at North Yorkshire, we are really trying to develop that early intervention so we can support people to live well and to remain in their own homes, because we are quite a large ageing population in North Yorkshire.
Thanks, Kate. Sorry, we've got two Kates. I beg your pardon, Kate White as well. So
Sorry.
do you want to come in now?
Hello. I just wanted to come to this as a carer of my partner who had dementia for 11 years. He died this year, not in a good and healthy environment, which was a care home, but he was at home for 8 or 9 years of his illness. I was responding particularly to the person who was talking at the beginning about running her own service around the values of love and connection, because it seems to me what was most important for John was having people who were seen by him as his companions, not as people who were providing a service. And so, and he played the piano, which was very helpful, because I said to him, well, John, they've come to learn to play the piano with you and to sing. So it was like he was in charge of the activity. That was very fortunate, I know. But it's like putting the person in charge of the situation to find the help in a way that isn't pathologizing. And I think the heart of love and connection is so critical. And I think you're right to be saying, let's look far and wide for people, because there are many, many people, I think, who would respond to the call for this kind of work, but feel intimidated by the sort of requirements. And also we have to think about the funding and the money that they're paid, because, you know, minimum wage is so demeaning for the kind of standard of love that we're asking people to provide. But in the care home, just to make the transition, we found the butterfly approach to care, which is about love at the centre of the home, the care home, but it's a love for the staff as well as the people living there. And that seemed to be the key, that retention of staff was gained by providing them with support and love as well as the residents. So that seems to be a really important feature for retention.
Thanks, Kate. Right. When you've got an hour and a half to do something, you think that's a really long time, don't you? And then you get into these really interesting conversations and an hour goes just like that. So we've only just got more than half an hour left. So I'm going to take an executive decision and say we won't split off into breakout rooms at this point. And what we want to do now, we need everybody's help to pull together the key themes and issues that we've just discussed in the last hour into a bit of a record, because if you remember back, the point of this day is for us to get really clear about what we see as the challenges and issues, what we see as the possible ways forward, and what we see as potential action and influence that we need to try and exert in order to achieve change. So we need to pull these themes out from people. Okay. All right, so we had the one around recruitment. So Helen, if you were to say what were your top 2 or 3 things we need to pay attention to around recruitment, what would they be?
It would be recruit for values and not for qualifications and experience.
Yep. And sorry,
change terms and conditions to make it attractive to people, which is instead of time and task, instead of paying people just in the way they're typically paid in home care, which is, you know, not salaries, not even paid for full shifts. So change terms and conditions to make it attractive, and to use value-based recruitment to recruit outside of health and social care.
It feels like there are some kind of alternative challenges coming our way about this. People are talking about registration of staff, for example. Would that be a solution or a problem for you?
Complete disaster. So, you know, that would utterly limit how attractive we could make this to people outside of health and social care. So we need to recruit people for their values and then train them, and then we can give people, you know, recognition for their training. But to only recruit people based on having certain training would just utterly shoot us in the foot in terms of value-based recruitment.
Okay, and so in terms of a lesson for us coming from this, we may need to have a conversation with CQC and others around the risks of something that many people seem to see as a solution to a problem at the moment.
Absolutely. So we desperately want a highly qualified staff, but I want people to be Isaac experts, you know, not have general qualifications. I want them to know exactly how Isaac wants to be supported and have the training relevant to that. So having a general qualification limits our ability to be truly person-centred in how we're supporting people.
Thanks. Okay, does anyone else want to chip anything in on the issue of staffing and recruitment?
Sorry, it's John.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a PA, plus I have a learning difficulty, and my wife has cerebral palsy. So I see things from a really wide perspectives. Plus, I run a day centre. But one thing I think where recruitment is concerned is like the young lady said, is about people being rushed in and out of homes to do jobs too fast and not having time to communicate. I think communication is a big thing in the way that the person wants to be communicated to. I think so. Where staffing is concerned, I think we've got to get the right people, and it needs to be in their capability of communication and how they are to people, and not just about qualifications. I think qualifications are really, really important, that they've got to have those qualifications, but I think they are second to having an understanding and able to communicate properly.
Thanks a lot. So we've got Liz.
Hi, yeah, I think values-based recruitment is absolutely essential, but there's got to be a sense of personality matching as well that I think often comes through with values-based, but can't be underrated. It's about a relationship, isn't it? And whether I employ PAs with my brother and my daughter, and they have to get on with everybody. We're a family providing support to different members of our family. And if you neglect those relationships between each of the individuals involved, then things go awry. People need great communication skills and real resilience in dealing with the ups and downs.
Thanks, Liz. Luke?
Oh, he's not going to speak now. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. You probably just need to, you've got what they call it, a residual hand up there or something. That's it. Great, thank you. Could we move on to the issue of commissioning then? And it'd be great if this isn't just a kind of commissioning bashing conversation, but a conversation about how could commissioning be done differently in order to support people to have the home experiences that we've been describing. How could commissioning change? You know, people get any examples of commissioning being done differently? Jump in.
Martin?
Yeah.
Hi, I've been listening very carefully all morning and I'm really impressed so far. I think it's fair to say that the commissioning of social care, whether it be residential or domiciliary, it's all over the place. You know, whether it be social care, home helps as we used to call them, or warden service as we used to call them, and the district nurses. There is an example actually in the Colne Valley. I'm sure you're well aware of it. It's the Colne Valley Care Cooperative. It's only on a very small scale, and they've had a lot of support from the Kirklees Council. And they have about 12 clients and about 8 staff, and they give their clients at least an hour per visit. Some clients have maybe 3 or 4 visits a day, but it's done differently. It's not done commercially. It's done on a cooperative basis, where I'm a shareholder actually, where the shareholders invest their money into the cooperative, and they employ staff, and they commission care for their resident or clients on a much better equitable basis than what's been happening so far. And if this can be replicated across the country, I'm not saying it's going to be a panacea, but it's a lot better than what we've been used to.
Thanks, Philip. And I am aware of that example, and maybe if people are interested, we could share that with others who might be interested. Rob, I see you've got your hands up on commissioning.
I was just going to give an example in Gloucestershire, where we've had a really good relationship with the commissioner to explore the idea of home share. So, and again, home share again is a potential model to really explore in this debate, in terms of where people have got a spare room in a house or a property, and they can be matched to somebody who needs cheaper accommodation and is prepared to give some companionship back. And I think what's really positive about it is the sense of mutuality in that both sides gain, and the house becomes an asset that you can use in brokering those really good relationships that allow somebody to keep living independently in their own home, but have companionship, have some low-level support. And the real positive that we've had from a commissioning point of view was exploring that and getting funding from a commissioner to develop that, knowing that we were not going to get huge numbers of people straight away, that they've given us a number of years to develop the model. But what they wanted to commission was the learning about a different way of providing care and support, more than that we've got a conveyor belt of 10,000 people that are suddenly getting care hours. Much more about, can we change the debate? Can we learn together, commissioner and us as the provider in this instance, and introduce that to our community and see if it works together before we know either way if it's going to be, and without there being very tough KPIs driving it. Much more about, does this change the game? Does it raise the expectations and ambition? Does it create better lives? So definitely sort of I
think there's 2 issues there. One is commissioning alternatives that can offer something that people want, and secondly, learning about how to commission more flexibly, and being able to kind of have a go, take some risks, not need to be able to nail down exactly what's going to happen. Helen, I'm going to bring you in, and again here, I think, yeah, sorry, you've got your hand up. I didn't notice it was, yeah.
I'd like to do a big caution about what might be seen as the new shiny thing, which is commissioning for outcomes.
Okay.
Because this has been debunked by research led by Toby Lowe and Human Learning Systems. Because outcomes, for example, keeping people out of hospital, you could see that as a good outcome to give a home care provider. But actually the factors that enable people to stay living well at home are not in the gift of the home care provider. We can do some things, but we can't focus on everything that keeps people well and out of hospital. And what they've done instead is commission for learning and being based in partnership and sharing the risks of doing that. So I'd really recommend looking at human learning systems and Toby Lowe's work for a way past, beyond commissioning for outcomes, to this much more partnership, systems working together, and let's move out of silos approach.
But I think you have been involved more recently in a kind of experimental approach that brings together health and social care funding,
Yes.
that allows that kind of exploration that Rob was setting out there. Is that right?
Yeah, so what we did in wellbeing teams, our purpose was support people to live well at home and be part of their community. And therefore we use the time and energy and love of the team to do both of those things, to support people to be live well at home, to address what was working and not working for individuals, to support them to be part of their communities and use their passion and purpose and gifts. And ironically, people were kept out of hospital as a result of that, because we were focusing on gifts, I think, on purpose and using teams' strengths. And the person who talked about the butterfly approach in care homes, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's bringing your whole self to work as team members and supporting people to address what matters to them if they're people being served, and those two things working together. It has to be relationship based. But because we were delivering some healthcare tasks, and what's traditionally seen as social care, we were getting that integration, and I think that's part of what enabled us to do that, and focusing on community in partnership with community circles. So I think we have to put healthcare and community together if we want to see a massive change, and that does require not only providers working differently, but being commissioned differently to deliver and not hamstrung to particular outcomes.
So that feels like it's a particular kind of integration, isn't it? So, integration is all over the place, and we're going to have an integration white paper fairly soon. But obviously, people are concerned about what that integration might look like. It strikes me that you wouldn't have been able to do what you've done there without health and social care money, because the social care money wouldn't have been enough to do what you've been doing. Is that right? Or?
Well, the example that I gave is from Thurrock, and Thurrock commissioners were very brave, and they worked really closely in health, but it was funded through adult social care. And the challenge is that if you then do work that supports people to stay out of hospital, the savings for that are made by the health system and not the social care system, and therefore there's very little motivation for social care colleagues to invest their funding in stuff that supports health budgets. And I think that's why we get all sorts of perverse incentives not to join things up. So they were brave doing that, and I think their next step is to legitimately bring health and social care money together in the expansion of wellbeing teams in Thurrock.
Okay, thank you. So there's a whole bunch of reasonably complex issues there to consider in respect of commissioning. Could we talk a little bit about one of the other themes that I've heard quite strongly in this conversation, which is the question of loneliness, and how that isn't dealt with in a very traditional service providing or commissioning kind of way, because it's more than what a home care provider does, isn't it? So what are the other things that need to be in place? I heard people talk about someone kind of missing the residential care home that they didn't really like being in, but feeling lonely. What are the other things that need to be in place that are beyond the traditional kind of domiciliary support in a place that can help avoid that, and how might those be done? What thoughts have people got there? I've seen one or two people nodding. So
I think having a strong community, we have a stronger communities team that we link with, and we almost asset map what's out there in terms of voluntary sector. We have and we can almost asset map gaps across the county. And I think having a strong third sector is really key. And active in that, so there is that other option there about keeping people well, connecting them with the communities, and I think that good local knowledge and partnership working with our voluntary colleagues works well.
How do you make that work at a time when so much money's been taken out of the system? Isn't that the most vulnerable stuff, the the support for community activity and third sector organisations and so on?
I think because we had, I can't think when the Stronger Communities, it would be about the Care Act time, we had a Stronger Communities team set up and developed, and it was funded. So they were given targeted money to support. So they would, I don't know, they would get to know. So we have an in-house sensory team. So the sensory team would say there's a real lack of information, advice and guidance. People are really struggling with this in this area. And they would fund local voluntary sectors to put, say, a mobile minibus on that would travel across the county into the really rural areas with equipment demonstrations, advice. So I think they have been quite proactive in making sure that that money's there. To bolster that support, and it came in really well as part of the COVID response.
Thanks, Kate. Liz.
Hi, yeah. When I was a young single parent, I lived in a housing co-op where it wasn't massive, but we were living alongside people who shared values and a commitment to building community and helping each other out. We didn't live together. We each had our own house or flat. And I see something really positive in that kind of model, both for me as I age and for my daughter, and would really love to find a way to set that up for people who don't have the money to build and buy their own scheme.
Yeah. Okay. So a kind of interesting kind of ideas about how people might come together, might live the lives that they want with the support that they want. And then there are kind of questions about, how does that happen? What does it take to make that happen? How much is this about commissioning? How much is it about other people's behaviour, etc.? Thanks, Liz. Jane?
I think so much of it is about the wider picture of lack of inclusivity in communities, and that's one of the issues that my daughter faces. So many things that she'd like to do, but those things just don't include her, aren't easy for her to engage with. Things like, she really would like to work. She like everyone has that right to, if that's right for them. She'd love to start by doing some voluntary work, but it's extremely hard to find appropriate places in the community that are able to support her to do that. So it's not just about the support that's provided to her through her package of care. It's also looking at attitudes in our communities generally, and if that makes sense to people.
Thanks. What kinds of things do you think would need to change, Jane, to change that situation?
Oh, such a hard one. I mean, I think. I mean, my daughter is, as I said, is autistic, so I'm hoping that the new autism strategy will assist with that. In that, there should be a big drive towards educating people about autism and helping people to know how to support someone with autism. That's obviously only a very small part of the people that we're talking about who want to be included in society, but I think that's where we face difficulties, that if you approach somewhere, it's that barrier that people don't want to include somebody that isn't, if you like them and like the others that join that group.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, yes, thanks, Jane. Rob, I'm going to bring you in and then Helen. Rob, you talked about loneliness and what you think that means.
Yeah, I think, because in part it's about disconnection, but I think it's also about an absence of purpose. And I think I go back to Math's comment at the end of the video. It's about, that's what we need, is we need people in our lives and we need things to do. And I think, well, what is it then that stops people having things to do? And part of that will be some practical barriers. It can be confidence issues. It could be a whole range of things, but it is also going to be linked to ageism and disableism that doesn't expect people to be contributing or giving. And so I would really support Jane's points that actually, until society says, we want you in our lives, we want you to be contributing, we expect you to be contributing, we're never going to really achieve that. And so I think some of the social care response, other than the task-based support to people, has to be creating the conditions that say, everybody is welcome, and in fact everybody's contribution is demanded in our society, and that's not what we've got at the moment. So yeah, down with befriending schemes, because that doesn't address the issue of sense of purpose, a sense of being connected, and up with let's raise the expectations that we want and we need people contributing, and that's what we're going to try and do, is give them the means to do that, rather than give them a sticking plaster that makes them feel better for 20 minutes but doesn't really shift the underlying problems.
Thanks, Robin. I see that Kath Barton from Community Circles has put a link in to the chat for a kind of alternative way of connecting people through shared interests that people might be interested to follow. Helen.
Let's be the change we want to see here. I think there are initiatives like Small Sparks that will enable us to do some of those things and get them started. And where the welcoming groups currently don't exist, I think we have a responsibility and opportunity to create them. And in wellbeing teams, we met lots of women who wanted to knit and had no groups to knit and were living by themselves, and created a knit and natter group. But the thing that stopped people taking part in that was transport, so they couldn't get out of their homes. So part of what wellbeing teams did was organise community transport too. And again, that is not seen as a home care responsibility, getting people out into the community, and that's part of why we need to change home care to embrace supporting people to live well and be part of the community. So I'm naturally the person that's sorting out transport, making sure you've got your wool, having the conversations about the patterns that you're using, because it is purpose. We don't talk enough about purpose. We talk about loneliness, but it's purpose. So how can we use things like Small Sparks, Jane, to create those welcoming groups where they don't currently exist? And how can we be using shared interests as the alternative to befriending, as a way of getting people alongside each other, immediately with something to talk about that matters to them?
Thanks, Helen. Liz, is that a new hand? No, it's an old hand, sorry. An old hand. We've not got very long left. And another theme that came up a little bit, but perhaps didn't get explored very much, was tech. I think Rob and Helen, for example, touched on it. To what extent is tech helpful here, and what might be its limitations? You coming in, Helen?
Yes, I had an old hand up, but I've got something to say here. So again, one of the things that great support can do is link people up through things like Facebook and through WhatsApp groups and Zoom and FaceTime. So I think there's lots of opportunities to use apps and different ways of connecting people up who live far apart. So I think that's really important. I think if we're not supporting people to use apps, then we're not even touching the beginning of the possibility of the use of tech. So around communities of interest, being online with people who are sharing the same interests. And of course, I know there are safety issues, but I know there are ways that we can get around that as well. So I think tech has got a contribution to support people to do more of what matters to them and to stay connected to their loved ones.
Thanks, Helen. Anyone else on tech?
Can I come in, Martin?
Yep.
So I just would like to echo what Helen has said. So I would only be really busy on the days that I could afford support. And actually, I was never introduced to tech, only COVID, and now I can be busy every day because of tech, even when I haven't got support. It's a real life changer for me, being able to connect with people, being able to manage my own mental well-being using simple things like apps. Actually, no one ever spoke to me about that at all, and it was only just by COVID and off chance speaking to other peers. Yeah.
Thanks, Isaac. I see one or two comments in the chat. Daphne, you're trying to come in?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
It's the thing about tech is that it puts more responsibility onto me, because my husband was expert in tech in his youth and as a young man, but has nothing to do with it now. So one needs enablers to be able to participate or take up tech.
Yeah, I think that's been something that people have found a lot, especially over this last 2 years, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, my learning curve on Zoom, Team, you name it, has been massive. And my shopping is all done on the internet. But I have to do it all.
Yeah.
Nobody else does. And there comes a point when I just feel totally overloaded with it all.
Hello.
Hi, John.
I don't know how to put my hand up. So
all right, no worries. Go on.
Technology is really, really important, but like the lady just said, it is on the person, and technology changes so quickly that there's got to be a way that people can be shown and taught this, and I think technology has a purpose, but it takes away the human part of communication, and it's then social care rely on the tech to do the work rather than get human contact there. So we have to be very careful of that.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, folks. We're coming to the end of our time. There's lots of things being put in the chat which go beyond people's thoughts and ideas, but offering practical stuff. For those people who are joining us this afternoon, we'll get much more into the practical solutions and the ways forward and the actions and so on.
Basically, it was just to get
sorry, could somebody mute who's got the background noise there? Thanks very much. So next steps are we have lunch till 1:30, then we all come back together and we look at where we've gotten to, and then we separate again into the two streams to get into, okay, so what do we need to do and who can do what and what action might be taken in the stream. So you can stay in this stream in the afternoon, or you can go into the other one. Gaynor, is it possible to put the link in the chat again that people will need for the immediate after lunch session?
Yeah, will do.
Yeah, thank you. Conscious that it can be a bit tricky finding links, etc. So we're coming to the end of our time. We've got, oh, are we coming to the end of our time?
Not quite.
We've got another 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Here's me working till 12:30 and rushing you all through. We've got another 15 minutes. I do apologize. Okay, so we've covered tech, we've covered commissioning, we've thought about what we mean by loneliness and what might be some of the potential solutions to that. Let's have a few more minutes on other themes that feel important to people here in terms of the challenges that we're facing and how to address them. Hands up. Have you got your hand up again, Helen? You're being a bit dominating in this session, I must say, Helen.
This will be the last thing I say. I'm responding to Liz's questions about the support sequence. I think one of the really practical things we can do is whenever social workers or anybody is working with somebody to figure out what to do next, and they've really listened to what matters to the person and what's working and not working in their perspective, the support sequence basically says, how can we support you to do as much as you want to and can do around achieving your outcomes, and then where can we use technology, where can friends and family help, what's available in your local community, what's available from kind of universal services, you know, are you using the right professional services, and then the availability of paid staff. And if we just took that really simple approach, it means that we're always considering technology as the possibility for helping people change their lives, and we're always thinking about the contribution of community. So I think that, so it's almost like a simple hack for when we're planning with people, that we're just going through this sequence. So I think those are some of the things that that we could consider in the future.
Thanks, Helen. I'm going to come to Wendy and Alec in a minute, but is Paul here? Paul Rackham. Hi, Paul. So you put a comment in the chat about working with Mediquit. Yeah. Could you just expand on that for us a little bit?
Well, Mediquit provide community equipment to help people stay at home, and they provide aids and adaptations, but quite often they're commissioned very specifically to provide a specific service against activity and efficiency targets. And what we're asking ourselves is how we can be part of the whole system that supports people to stay independent, so that we deliver independence rather than just delivering equipment. And I guess I was slightly challenged by the language at the beginning, because community equipment is essentially a logistics exercise, getting stuff to people quickly. but people want it done with love and feeling at the same time. And we're working with community catalysts at the moment to help us understand what sort of feedback we can get from the community and how we can work on that across all of the 43 different contracts we have. But I think it was community catalysts who talked about the meaningful moments that Mediquit staff have with people who are quite often, that's the only person they will see during the day. But very similarly to home care, we have routing software that routes drivers as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. So what we're asking ourselves is if we can allow drivers more flexibility to make judgments for themselves about how long they need to stay in someone's home to explain equipment. So rather than the measure being, I left an information leaflet, the outcome could be that someone really understood and was confident in using their equipment. So that requires liaising with external organisations to make sure there's a supporter or a family member there at the time we deliver equipment. So our managing director, David Griffiths, has got a really nice quote. He says something like, Mediquit is really proud to be part of the health and social care system. But lots of people see it as just a logistics company. And it wants to step out of that sort of restrictive approach, which is why my question was about commissioning for outcomes. But I take Helen's point about human learning systems, and I think I just need to go and do some more background reading on that, because that's, and one of the challenges for Mediquit, of course, is that the practice here is fairly cutting edge, but the specifications we're getting to sort of tender for are quite often fairly traditional. So whilst we're very excited to hear about this language and this way of working, if we went into a contract monitoring meeting, say we're training our staff in love and feelings and emotions, and there'd be a slight sort of quiet moment, I guess, in the contract.
I really hope that you do that though, Paul, I must say. And I think next time you go into a contract managing meeting, that's what you should do. And then you should come back and report to us on your experience.
I feel like I'm part of an intervention.
Yeah. Can I just add, maybe go into that contract monitoring meeting with someone that's accessed your service? Like I've used Mediquit for years and years, and my local authority recently decided small pieces of equipment will come from the pharmacy, and actually what the pharmacy do is leave it outside the front door. They don't have that expertise. So I think really using people's experience of the relationship is important.
Well, I've learned a lot today from listening to people, which I guess was the point of the session, really. So most of what
sounds really interesting what you're trying, Paul, and I think we should explore it more with you if you've got the time to do that.
I'd love it, and I'd love if, I think Isaac's idea of people who use the service, we've started working with local health watches across the country to sort of set up different groups, but different groups have had different strengths and different speeds, depending on the sort of commitment of local commissioners, the capacity of local organisations, and sometimes the capacity of Mediquit itself. You know, we're still learning as we're going along, really.
Well, I'd really like to book an appointment with you, if that's all right, to explore this further, and we can take your experience into the next steps of our work, if that would be all right.
Well, I think so, because I think community equipment is such an underpinning part of most people's lives. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not the star. It's not that it doesn't. But you know, in terms of the three things I heard at the beginning were love, comfort, and safety, and community equipment can do two of those things.
Yeah. Brilliant.
It's done
Thanks,
well.
Paul. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Yeah. Wendy. Those pale hands, I can't often see them. I miss them. I see the yellow ones, but I miss the pale ones. Sorry, go on, Wendy.
So I think one of the challenges, Martin, is that the people and families about having that understanding about what all the options are for living.
Yeah.
So you often talk to people and they don't understand all the options. They don't think it's an option that they could be living independently in an ordinary house, and they automatically think of supported living or residential care. So I think that's a challenge as to how we make sure that people and families really understand what the options are.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks for bringing that out, Wendy, because that's I think, been another theme of this conversation early on, around people having the information and the advice that they need in order to have an opportunity to make choices, or even to design something that suits them. This does feel like a significant issue, doesn't it? I don't know if other people have got thoughts about that. Right. Okay, I'm going to go to Alec.
Yeah, at the risk of sounding as if I'm going to found Helen's apologies. Going to start Helen's fandom club. I'm really struck, and we've done a lot of work here in Bradford in the last 2 years around strength-based approaches, but actually how often in social care and health we have a real deficit approach to people, and it's really undermines the individual, and actually having much more positive conversations around what would people like to do. And I mean, we listen back to phone calls rigorously, and we've redesigned forms, so we've taken out a lot of tick boxes, so it's much more conversational. But there is a real deficit feel across health and social care.
Yes, I think most people would agree with that. And I guess the key question for all of us, perhaps more this afternoon, is what can we do about that? Who needs to do what to change this? Much of the conversation about workforce that's been already seems very relevant in relation to that. I'm just having a look at the chat. Neil,
it's difficult, Martin, though, isn't it? Like this stuff that we talk about, because we talk about like seeing what people can do for themselves, but actually when people come to assess you, it's like all of that deficit model. So it's totally different. It's so difficult for people to be understanding all of these different models and all of the way that one person assesses you, and it's really challenging stuff. And when things go really well, what happens? They cut your care and support. They don't realise that often it's because of your care and support that things are going really well.
Okay, we really are down to our last 5 minutes now, and I'll probably again talk about what we're doing this afternoon in a moment, but I'll go to Luke first.
A few years ago, we went to a PIP assessment. And the kinds of questions they were asking somebody like me were really stupid.
I got my mum and I really want
He says, I've got my mum here. He doesn't know whether I want to explain what it was like. But yeah, the kinds of questions that they asked, that they can clearly see how Luke was. Yeah, very, very silly. Anything else you want to say? No. Okay. That's
thanks,
it.
Luke. Yeah, that's a very common experience, of course, isn't it? That many people have relayed to us. And I think, you know, the challenges and issues that people have raised in the conversation this morning strongly reflect the issues that people raised in the inquiry that Anna and Isaac and others led. We've, in the conversation this morning, we've started to identify some of the things that we need to pay attention to if we want to change this situation. And we've started to identify some examples of better things that we need to bring more to the fore if we want to change this situation. This afternoon, we're going to focus more on what we can do, because obviously the reason for us coming together as a movement is in frustration about these things, but we call ourselves Born in Frustration but Powered by Hope. And if we don't have hope, and if we don't come together to identify what better looks like and how we might take action to achieve that better, then we know there's no chance of better happening. So this afternoon is going to be much more focused on, okay, so what can we do? What can we do? What can we encourage and persuade and support others to do to improve this situation? So I hope you'll come back to help us for that session. In some respects, it's a harder session, but in some respects, perhaps also a more kind of positive looking session. So I am going to stop us now. The details of the links for this afternoon are in the chat if people are struggling. If people are struggling, email us and we'll sort you out. All right, so I'll see you after lunch, everybody. Have a good break. Thanks for all the work this morning.